So next we're going to talk about MockCop. MockCop is a global conference that simulates what COP could look like if ambitious youth climate activists ran the show in the course of 2 weeks. The COP talks are the international climate talks where world leaders come together to, at least theoretically, pledge bold climate action. The COP talks have given us things like the Paris Agreement, in which world leaders pledge to keep global warming well below 2 degrees Celsius. But the activists at MockCop aren't satisfied. uh, the activists at MockCop aren't satisfied. They drew up a treaty world leaders could theoretically adopt, focusing on 6 themes: climate education, climate justice, health and well being, climate adaptation, and protecting biodiversity. For more on it, I'm joined by Mana Saza. How did just this whole thing come about? How did you organize this thing?
So, all the youth were quite annoyed, not annoyed, but we were all very disappointed by the outcomes of COP25, by the fact that it was really not ambitious enough and all the goals, yeah, we're just not meeting the expectations that we youth really had. Um, and so once the COP26 was postponed, that's already a really big issue because it's not like climate change is stopping, but the fact that they postponed it seems as though climate change was kind of put to the side of their agendas, which shouldn't be the case. It should really be put at the center of everything. So unfortunately, that happened, and so once the postponement happened, the youth, especially in the UK through Teach the Future (FFF), kind of got together and said, okay, this is a really big problem. We need to fill the gap of the postponement of COP26. So what should we do? We should create a mock COP. So that's kind of where it all unraveled. And ever since then, we've had 18 main staff members who are operating mock COP, which includes me. I'm one of the Asia coordinators. I'm currently living in Japan. And we also have someone from India, Philippines, Kenya, Nigeria, and mostly all the continents except for Antarctica. So yeah, that's kind of the start of it all.
You mentioned we the youth. I just want to
Mm-hmm.
kind of pick up on that point. Who is
Yeah.
we the youth?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So obviously that is quite a big question because depending on the country, youth is really defined differently in terms of their age-wise. So at the very beginning, MockCop said youth is up until 25 years old. But then as we started, rolling in applications, we really noticed that people who are from the global south and MAPA countries, they most of the time start working for sustainability or climate change a bit more in their later years in life. So we've actually increased the age range to 30 years old. So that's what we define as youth for MockCop.
Um, and getting, I guess, more at the heart
Mm-hmm.
of mock cops. I mentioned the treaty before, which is basically,
Yeah.
this model world leaders could, in theory, probably not, but in
Mm-hmm.
theory, they could, adopt. Just kind of take
Mm-hmm.
us through, I guess, maybe the points of the treaty that stand out the most to you.
Mm-hmm. Of course. Yeah, so the treaty is quite extensive because, it covers all the five themes that uh, we really emphasize at MockCop. But I think two of the main ones I really want to point out is one, the involvement of youth in more of the decision making processes, right? There's a lot of charters, for example, SERI and within the Paris Agreement as well, youth are really identified as vulnerable populations that should be included in the talks of climate change. But in reality, they're not yet at that point of really including the youth at, the major decision making. So one of the policies that we include in the treaty is to really include the youth within these forms of um, decision makings as a whole. And secondly, would be um, to incorporate climate change education within the school system, because if we don't learn about what is causing all this climate change, how can we really solve it? There's no way of really solving it without knowing fundamentally what is causing it all in the first place. So I think those two are the main things that I would really highlight from the treaty that I would really personally want every single country to adopt, so we can really, shift from the linear economy we have right now to a more circular one, for example.
And why the emphasis on youth specifically? You kind of hinted on it, but it,
Mm-hmm.
do, do you think there's kind of this generational conflict? And
Yeah.
are you, I don't want to say that you're provoking a generational conflict, but to what
Uh-huh.
extent, does this generational conflict at all matter? Why
Mm-hmm.
are you emphasizing this idea of the youth?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think so. It's not actually just the youth that I really want to emphasize, but I think you do point out a really good point about that. There seems to be a generation gap, one, but it's the fact that, within these decision makings, it's really important to be inclusive. And in order to be inclusive, you have to have people who are from different backgrounds, different industries, and different age ranges. And right now, we just see that most of the adults are the ones who are in the decision making, and the rest of the population is not included. And so, in that sense, in order to create inclusivity, it's really important to have that youth also in this decision making, because there's no way of the adults to really know how the youth feel unless you talk with them and really engage with them. You can't just see youth through numbers and stats, which is what usually happens. They have surveys to learn about, what are the priorities youth have in their life, but actually listening to voices and coming face to face about how to really, you know, discuss certain topics is a lot more different from just looking at numbers and saying, yes, you really think this X, Y, and Z. But in reality, there's more to it all. There's a complex system, like our ecosystem, that you have to really unravel. But you can only unravel if you start, linking one aspect at a time, and you can't really do that without just talking with someone. Not just talking with someone, but just looking at stats and whatnot. So that's why youth is really important. But I also just wanted to point out that youth are very ambitious nowadays. I mean, they've always been, but we're really ambitious and passionate about the climate change, and I'm sure you are too. But we really understand that it's important to put this issue at the center of everything right now. And if we really don't voice this, there's there is a limited time frame already. So we really need to press this issue to the forefront of everything. And I think youth have the power to do that, as we demonstrated from the MockCop. And people actually are supporting for this movement, Adults actually want to do a lot on this topic, but they already have um, other commitments that really refrain them from doing things that we can do with MockCop as well. So by you standing out and saying, voicing our opinions, it does actually give power to the adults as well to support us. So I think that's why it's really important for youth to really be involved in these forms of decision makings as well. I hope I answered it right.
You kind of see it as getting youth into the space in which they should be in the
Mm-hmm.
beginning, but they haven't been.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes,
okay.
exactly. Exactly. Well put.
Um, so, also,
Mm-hmm.
one key element, obviously, is climate justice. Where does
Mm-hmm.
your
Right.
treaty, proposed treaty, talk about it? And what are kind of the themes of climate justice it's emphasizing?
Mm-hmm. So climate justice, we really talked about, for example, mental health. So we don't necessarily, right now what's happening is that climate change is focusing a lot on how to say, like, scientific things that are impacting or using science as a reasoning um, to address climate change, which shouldn't be only the case. There's other social things and other aspects that are cultural that are impacting everyone to create this environmental issues, for example, which kind of lead to the global warming as a whole as well. So what we do for this climate justice is to really make sure that, children have the rights to a clean future. And that is a form of justice, because if you can't have a neighborhood that has clean air, if you're located next to a factory that's always polluting, how can you have a healthy body? And in the long term, when you are sucking in all that exhaust and, polluted air, you won't have a long life, which means that your body is already weak when you're already 20 something. And by that time, that means that you're also not able to access a lot of opportunities because of your health issues as well. So I think that really ties into the fact that, we really want to make sure that the children of the future and the current people as a whole, we all have the right over clean environment as from the start, or else, it's discussing not only about the human body, but also about the environment. It's hand in hand. If we don't do things for the environment, we're also not doing things for the humans that are living on it, and other animals and other species who are living alongside that as well. So I think those are the main points that we really wanted to highlight through the climate justice.
And so what you're saying is that they're kind of in our discussion of climate change. You noted mental
Mm-hmm.
health. Do you
Mm-hmm.
think we don't have the discussions around climate change aren't broad enough?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, there is quite a difficulty around that, because um, climate change affects different populations at different times. And it's really difficult to identify every single thing that people are undergoing. For example, a few months ago, I was meeting someone from the Ministry of Finance in Japan. And one of the youths asked me, "Oh, do you really feel climate change every day in your life?" And I said, "Yeah, of course." Well, during that time, it was around November. So we were talking about how I used to already wear a jacket, layers and layers, in order to keep myself warm. But during that time, I didn't have to. And considering all the flooding that was happening in southern Japan that took away many lives, like, how is it not possible to see climate change? But some people, have that privilege. So it's really easy for them to forget what could happen in the long run if things like this continue, and the natural disasters will become more severe. What is the meaning of water scarcity? A lot of people in Japan have never undergone water scarcity or food scarcity, so it's difficult to really imagine what you haven't experienced. And so I think that is kind of the fact that a lot of people, or some people, it's really hard for them to understand what's happening um, to someone who is in a MAPA country, or places that have been experiencing a lot more natural disasters and the impacts of climate change. For example, in the global south, it's really difficult. But for that reason, because we haven't, not everyone has been impacted yet by climate change severely, it's difficult to understand what are the other impacts that are arising because of this. So mental health is one of it. Um, and other things, obviously, but the people who are really able to discuss this at the roundtables are the people who have undergone through these sort of experiences, but most of the times their comments are really ignored at the COP, for example. And so even if they say it, it's not seen as an important topic. So that's kind of the reason why we also chose the 5 themes of MockCop 26. Those are all themes that we thought were really important that should be addressed at the COP itself, but isn't highlighted enough. So yeah.
So you mentioned that it wasn't really highlighted at the real COP. So again,
Mm-hmm.
kind of the idea being that mock cop is this is what it would be like if we ran the show. It,
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. So what, it's exactly what you said. Like, what would happen at a climate conference if youth were at the center or youth were more at the decision makings um, at these conferences? Like, what would we bring to the table? Like, how can we contribute? And that's really the whole question that was brought up to really highlight through our conference as a whole.
and obviously this is a conference for by youth.
Hmm.
So who like to what extent do you think the youth
Hmm.
that are actually participating in this conference, to what extent are you reflective of the larger, to what extent are you reflective of the larger population, I guess, of youth? I mean, because kind of it's
Hmm.
a small subset of, I suppose, very ambitious people,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, no, I totally understand. I think that goes hand in hand with mostly any sector that's trying to address climate change. We really face that wall that most of the population either A care or B don't care. And I think we're still at the stage where people are realizing, climate change is an issue in their daily lives. Most people know that there's something wrong with our planet and we need to do something. But most of the people just don't know what to do. What is the solution? How can we really change? It's not, put on the table per se. So that's why it's really difficult for many or much of the majority of the population to participate in these climate change talks because there's not enough platforms or places that we can talk about this issue. I know that a lot of schools don't actually, this is why we also brought in the importance of teaching climate change because there's not enough um, students who are able to address this issue or talk about it and ask about it, although they might be interested in it. So, you know, as you said, like what to do with the general population, I think that we youth and people who are really ambitious and we're part of MockCop and FFF and so many other organizations, what we could really do is, even start with teaching about what is climate change to our family members, and from our family members, how do we really ask them to ask other people as well in their workspace and um, extending from there, ask them to ask their colleagues, like, how do they think climate change is impacting them and us and people in the future? Is it really correct to um, go as we currently are? But the issue is the fact that not everyone has the capacity to do that. A lot of people we have to live every day by making paycheck to paycheck. And asking people like that to think about climate change, stopping and directing their job to a different direction is really difficult because some people just don't have the capacity, so we can't just ask everyone to change overnight. That's impossible. But you could always plant seeds in everyone to say, okay, please think through what you're doing, what is the power of your consumption. Where do you buy your things from, especially in the global north? Do you really need that item? um, Maybe you can just, try to stitch up your old clothes instead of buying new ones or buying secondhand clothes. Do you know what your jeans are made out of? How much water pollution it causes? So these are some things that we can all start from. But it can be baby steps. It doesn't always have to be a massive change. But for people who can, we really want to press this issue to change as a whole.
And so, given that, to what extent do you think
Mm-hmm.
thinking about climate change is somehow a
Yeah.
very privileged thing?
So I think that really ties back into the fact that it's also about the capacity. As I said before, do you have the time and can you put in the effort to try to address this climate change issue within your daily life and within your workspace, for example? Because a lot of people actually, even if they want to buy organic things or local things, it's actually a lot more expensive. And do I have that extra money to put in it? Not really, right? So it's really about the capacity, but also changing the small things where you can, because we all know that people live in different circumstances. So, trying to do the most within what you have does create a change of different habits, and it kind of starts from there. But we can't always identify individuals to be responsible for these forms of changes. We really need to press for the importance of corporations, as well as international alliances and governments to really step in, because I mean, my point would be like, if you're not stepping in now, when would you ever need to step in, right? We have a ticking bomb, and we can't just leave it to the side and say, oh yeah, I'll deal with that bomb later. It's not going to set off. No, it's ticking already. It's already started, and it's just a matter of time. We throw water bombs at it and see if it really hits that bomb like 100 meters away. Like, we have to start somewhere. We can probably create more different technologies that can create different, better accessibility, for mobility and food scarcity and distribution as a whole. But we need to start somewhere, and we need to do it quickly.
Mm-hmm. And getting back to MockCop, according to the press release, 72% of delegates are from the
Mm,
global south.
yes.
Why does that matter?
Mm. I think that's quite the answer would be probably a lot more direct than a lot of people think, is the fact that, the global south, most of the people who have experienced the direct impacts of climate change are people from the global south, um, and don't have, for example, enough adaptation and mitigation methods. And also the fact that, secondly, a lot of these countries, when they're participating in the COP, their voices are unheard or pushed aside. And we just really wanted to bring to the table the importance of what their experiences are and what their thoughts are, right? Because there's the people who have experienced it already and are experiencing it the most severely should be at the forefront of these decision makings, or we can learn so much from them, as well as, we really need to put them, at the center of these sort of talks. Like, why is their voice is really important is because they are vulnerable, but also they have something to say, and without, having, the capacity to, or the willingness to listen, it's really difficult to create an even better, solution for climate change if we're not listening to what they have to say. So I think that's kind of the main point.
And I think the MockCop staff is always is obviously different from the MockCop delegates. I don't think the
Yes.
staffing is as diverse as that, is it?
No.
Um,
So go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, I just wonder kind of your reflections on that. Like, does that at all matter? Is it maybe a good thing that there aren't? I don't want to say it's a good thing
hmm
that there aren't, as many global South people, but maybe does it kind of help show that maybe global North people are finally stepping up to the plate, or would you wish that it was
hmm
different?
Yeah. No, I think you bring up a really good point. We one thing that's really great about our team of staff members is the fact that we're all from different continents, but we're also very oop, oh, I think oh good. I thought our Wi-Fi died again. Sorry. But yeah, I think more than 50% of the staff members are also gender diverse, from what I remember. But the fact that you just said that not all of our staff members, or the majority of staff members, are more from the global north than the global south, um, really identifies the fact that we know that we're responsible for most of the CO2 emissions and the global warming issues. And so, as you said, we really need to also take on that reign and say we really want to change as people from the global north. And I think it is quite symbolic that there is a bit more global north staff members who are trying to change as a whole. But I think next time when we do uh, have another round of MockCop, we really also would like to increase more participants or staff members from the global south as well, because I think equal numbers from both ends would be ideal. I think we did have a bit of some time frame issues when we were receiving applications and whatnot, so that must have been one of the reasons why we chose to have more global north participants than the global south as well.
Um, but next time around, it's going to be different. You're saying.
Yes, I would say so. I would hope so. You never know. I think so. One thing with the staff members is that SOS UK are the ones who are
Mm.
choosing who the staff members are. So that's another thing, right?
And yeah, SOS UK
Mm-hmm.
as well as what's the organization called? Shoot, I just had it.
Yes.
The other one, what's it called? The
Oh,
climate something.
SOS International.
That one and oh man,
Uh huh.
Client Earth. There we go. Client Earth,
Oh
Climb
yes, Client Air.
8. Ooh, can you kind of explain who all these sponsor
Mm-hmm.
organizations are? And
Yeah.
I think they're all Global North organizations. Correct me if I'm wrong.
So some of them are. So most of them are actually. Yes, you have a good point. So Client Earth um, are the ones that helped us with putting together the treaty. They were the ones who also provided us input on how to word the treaty to make sure that it can be passed as a law and as a policy. And Climate Invest, they're the ones who have been one of our biggest donors and believed in our work. So they're one of the biggest financial supporters for our end. The fact that, you mentioned that most of our supporters are actually from the global north. So that is quite an interesting topic, I would say, because the reason why that is the case is because most of these youth involvements and youth voicing our opinions are more valued in the global north, actually, rather than the global south. So I think that really speaks upon why
Hmm.
we have more supporters from global north, um, because of those forms of what certain people see as important. Like, why do a lot of times, for example, let me say, for example, about the media attention. So, in most of the global south, we've reached out to quite a number of media agencies, but unfortunately, we weren't able to receive a coverage that is as big as the global north, mainly because people ask us, okay, well, if we're going to write this article, are you going to pay us money? Is this, why is it really important? People don't see the value of youth voicing their opinions yet to the extent of the global north at the moment. So there is a really big hurdle for that. And hence there is um, less support from the global south to some extent.
And I don't want to have this devolve to speculation, but why
Yeah, go
is
ahead.
that? Like, why,
Mm-hmm.
according to you, are youth voices not as valued in the
Mm-hmm.
global south and global south media?
Mm-mm-mm-mm. Um, so I think it's actually not just the global south, but it's also like an east-west issue as well. I've definitely experienced less coverage from Asian contacts. And even in Asia, Asia is quite big. So we also have very minimal coverage from the Middle East, for example. And that ties into, it's not just about youth, but is it who's part of this movement? Are there more women in it? Well, we don't want our country to think that women have more power or young girls can voice their opinions. So it's not actually just about the youth, but it's also gender. And it can be different backgrounds that people have. Do we really want to have Indigenous people talking in our media coverage? Some people don't want that because that does bring up political ties and other different complex issues that media really doesn't want to portray. So it's not just only about, the age, but it's also different social issues that people don't want to touch upon uh, that is causing this the media to not want us to really talk. So it's a global south north issue, but also east and west as well, I would
Uh,
say.
and again, like, is that because I, I don't
Mm.
mean to sound cynical, I don't, but like,
Yeah, no worries.
is this that the global north is really so much more progressive, or
Mm,
like, why, I guess
mm,
it's a question for the ages, but like, why
mm,
is
mm,
that the case that indigenous voices, the voices of women and non-binary people, etc., that these
mm,
voices aren't really valued?
it's not like their voices aren't valued, but I guess it's more about wanting to hide it or putting it to the side, for example. And the global north, I guess it's interesting because there is a cultural aspect to it, I think. In the global north context, most of these Western countries really emphasize the importance of individuality, for example. So voicing your own individual voice is already important. And you learn that from when you're young, right? But that's not necessarily the case in many countries. It's more about as a community, um, you should be more similar to the other person, or you shouldn't, voice your own opinion to that extent. I think there is quite a big cultural aspect to it. And, and one case from MockCop was the fact that we had one girl from a volunteer from Pakistan, and she mentioned that it was her first time to be asked to voice her own opinion because at school, she's not asked what her opinion is, especially from a girl, or the fact that, you're not really supposed to ask about climate change and different specific issues, right? There's already a set of topics that you're not allowed to talk about sometimes. So from the start, you have a different form of expectations from different people, and that's really culturally formed. And so there is a really big aspect as to why there is a more bigger emphasis on the global north and the global south in terms of media coverage and whatnot, and the supporting, because people are expected more in the west and global north to raise your opinions, and be more individualized from the get-go, whereas it's not necessarily the same in different contexts around the world. So I do think that is a massive um, reason behind this divide of youth voicing their opinions as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And just to kind of conclude,
Yes.
if I found my question, there we go. Um, here we go with the cynical questions again. I prepared a ton of these. No,
Oh, that was great.
I just wonder, to what extent,
Hmm.
on a realistic level, to what extent is
Yeah.
this gonna actually affect change?
Hmm.
Because I mean, you got good amount of press attention, at least in the north and the west.
Yeah.
You got sponsors,
Hmm.
you got people to
Hmm.
talk. But
Hmm.
do you like? Are you sensing that it's making any impact among the decision makers?
Yeah. So, it is quite a tough question as to
Mm,
whether or not we are able to make an impact through MockCop. Actually, I'm quite hopeful about this because, we've already received international attention and a lot of global leaders are hearing about us. But now that we're done with the conference, our real big step that will create an actual impact is the fact that we need to, uh, connect with more politicians and global leaders and people who are under them to learn about what is our treaty and not just only the 18 treaties, but how can we really implement it in the local context. That's what's really important, right? Because we can't just take that 18 treaty and say, here, take it. You can just take it as it is. There's no way we can do that. We always need to adapt it. Always need to change it so that it can really fit the local context. Because if we want that, those treaties to be implemented and kept and maintained in the long run, if you don't consider all the, the cultural barriers and the other interconnected issues as we discussed before, it won't last long. It's not a blueprint that you can just copy paste and implement in in Denmark and then do the same in Nigeria. You can't really do that. We have all different histories and cultures that create our individuality of each place and people. So we really have to identify those things. So we're in the second phase of really trying to address and make a change from here onwards by connecting um, to all these global leaders and people from different ministries, but also from corporations. Corporations have really strong um, powers. They're not just, we have multinational corporations that have big responsibilities in so many places. And, we really think that not just only global leaders, but we really need to address this to corporations as well and potentially receive support from their end to really pressure on the politicians as well as a whole to push for our agendas. And it doesn't even have to be all the agendas. It can be even one, one that actually, hits them and us. We're both sides of the youth and the adults within that country because you always have to find a midpoint for many things. It's not just about us saying, you have to do this, you have to implement our treaty. It's not that. It's about, finding what works for them and what works for us and how can we adapt these two things to make sure that we come to terms and are able to actually um, come up with something that's even better than maybe the treaties that we came up with. There's so much hope for that. So it doesn't actually have to be all the 18 treaties, but it can just even be one of the policies to be implemented. So that's one thing. But we've also been receiving a lot of big new outcomes. For example, now we're talking with COP26 operators about the youth engagement on their end um, on a regular basis. And we wouldn't have been able to do that without MockCop. And these forms of talks will really create a difference in what kind of decisions they will make on their end. And that is also increasing in many ways in different conferences and groups as well. We always receive contact to ask us, like, what is our opinion? How do they think we should, or what are our opinions and advices on certain aspects that they're wondering about how to operate? How do we really make sure youth can be involved in these forms of new decision makings? We get that question a lot, so in that sense, we're already seeing a lot of change, and people actually want to know and learn. And I think that's something that is quite inspiring, that it's not, our efforts weren't in vain. It is something that is adapting and is progressing substantially. So I'm quite excited to see where this is headed, and to see that we are going to make a difference. And it's not just about making a difference on our own, but through our delegates and much more of their communities and other people who are impacted by it. But at the very end of the day, it's all for our environment as a whole and our blue marble, right?